Alright, so I'm going to talk about Grunt today, but before I talk about Grunt at all, I just want to mention that I work at Boku. I teach people JavaScript and Jquery, and I write things like Grunt. Do a lot of open source work. And I just want to mention we're doing this little conference thing in December called News. That's a 2-day training thing in Boston, so if you're interested in learning more stuff from me and Rebecca and Dan, check it out on our website. Anyways, just wanted to mention that. It's going to be cool. So, Grunt. This is a tool. First of all, who's used Grunt? Anyone here used Grunt? Alright, so a fair amount of you guys have. I'm going to talk a little bit about Grunt for people who haven't used it mainly, and talk about some new changes that are coming up in 0.4. Talk a little bit about Yeoman, and let people know what's up with that, and just kind of give you like some little examples and stuff so you have a better idea of what this is. But before I talk about the tool specifically, I want to talk about why I created the tool. I created this, hopefully my battery will live the whole time. I didn't think about that. So I created this tool because I have a few jQuery plugins, like 50 or so. I've written quite a lot of little jQuery and JavaScript plugins, and they all need like the same stuff over and over again. I need to lint them, I need to run unit tests, I need to concatenate files and add banners and like minify them, and do all of these same things over and over again, right? And so there are great tools for that in general. Like Make, super cool for that. Like it's got ability to specify like just some default actions and specific targets and stuff like that. And it does the job really, really well if you're on Unix, or if you're on another system and you want to get Make for Windows or something that exists, but it's not like built in. It uses like all the bash tools. You have all the new POSIX stuff that you have installed in your system, which of course you don't necessarily have installed if you're on Windows, but you can like install PowerShell or something like that. So Make is like really great if you're on Linux or OS X. But then if you're on Windows, not really great. Now I don't do a lot of development on Windows, but people who might want to contribute to one of my jQuery plugins or JavaScript project or something like that, they might be using Windows. And I don't want to enforce this like really, to put to them, like a really draconian kind of like build process on them. And for them, Make is like, it's entering this whole world where you can never look back from when you start installing all that stuff. And it's cool, don't get me wrong, but I mean, people using Ubuntu don't use Make to build all of their projects, they just use apt to install the binaries. You know, it's like, people are looking for something simpler, and especially on Windows. Now, I started looking at Jake files. I looked at Rake. I mean, I've used Ruby. Rake was cool. I've fooled around with Jake. I started actually building a really big Jake file for my project. It was like 1,000 lines long. Because, you know, concatenating files is easy. You take this file, this file, this file, put them all together, generate output. But then what if you want to, like, dynamically build banners on there, or, like, programmatically modify the output as templates or something like that? You start to be like, the instant you ask yourself, how can I parse JSON in Bash? Like, you're like, forget it, like I need another solution for this. So I started writing this in JavaScript as a gigantic Jake file, and I want it to like log in a nice way, and I want like error reporting, and I want things to fail contextually. And after like 1,000 lines, and actually I gave this to Rick Waldron at one point. It was like he was using it in Jquery to build Jquery, and I was just like, I got to do something different. So I started building a tool. I said, hey, what if I can just install the tool and it has like all this, and I'll just write configuration for it. And so like that means that the tool has to be reliable and has to keep working, but I saw NPM, I saw Node, it's JavaScript, I put 2 and 2 together and started building this project. And after like 4 iterations of it, I released it in March. And it had like a bunch of tasks built in. It had like the ability to lint files with JSHint, uglify them, minify them with uglify, concat, minify, run unit or no unit tasks, that kind of stuff. But we've actually been working on it a lot. And we're very close to releasing a new version. I've been saying that since like about a month after April, so since about May or so. But we're actually really close now. We've almost completely done with the code, and now it's just documentation. So if anyone uses Grunt and wants to help me write documentation, like I've got a lot of docs to write, come see me after. But what I've been starting with the new Getting Started guide and stuff like that. So Grunt it came out of this need to do this stuff over and over again. I wanted to be able to say like, hey, I want to commit this one file with my project, and then you would just run this tool on this file, and it would just build your project the way you need it to. And that way, for every different project, you could have a slightly different configuration, like a main file, you know? But because Grunt, like, we're all doing JavaScript stuff, so hopefully we all have Node installed, and if we don't, it's a really easy install. It comes with NPM, the Node Package Manager, right? You guys probably all used that. So like, I'm already depending on JSInt and Uglify, which are Node modules. Why don't I just publish this thing to NPM? So I published it, and so you install Grunt from NPM. And all the Grunt plugins, which, if you look now, there's like almost 200 of them at this point. Now, I'm not going to say there are 200 uniques, because if I search for Jasmine, I'll find like at least 5 that are all Jasmine. So, you know, we're working on discoverability and stuff like that. But at the same time, there's a lot of plugins available that work. Well, they'll have to be updated for the upcoming 12.4. Again, this is beta software, right? I'm not 1.0 yet, but we're actually getting closer to that. Just want to point it out. So anyways, Grunt is this thing that I built to help me. Other people seem to be using it. We got a badass logo that I love. Isaac Durazo at Boku designed that, and I've got a bunch of stickers too, so I'll have those up later. People just keep asking for them. So anyways, let me kind of show you what Grunt is, because it's one thing to look at the website, gruntjs.com, go there and read all the things, but it's another thing to actually see it. So you would do npm install -g grunt to get it installed globally. Now that's merely to provide the binary, that's the script that's in your path, so you can just type grunt. You don't have to do that in your project. You can install Grunt locally in your project, in your package.json as a dev dependency, and like save, commit your package.json, and then just do npm install, and it's there locally. But then you have to do like /node module /bin/grunt to run every time. If you're in a subdirectory, it'd be like /node modules and stuff like that. So when you run the Grunt global binary, it does that searching for you, kind of like npm does. It can be any subfolder in your project, and it will just like do it from the right folder. And it basically starts in the working directory of the Grunt file and just does everything relative to that. So for an example, I'll just create a sample Jquery plugin using the init system. We've got this basic system of generators that will build up some scaffolding based on some basic questions. So if I like sample plugin, bump this up a little bit. So there's some built-in templates here already. So this sexy one was just something I was fooling with. It doesn't do anything, but it is sexy. So these are ones that are based around stuff that I do, and they're hard-coded into Grunt. Not the next version of Grunt, but very, very soon. Like we've broken init out into a separate thing. All of the plugins inside of Grunt, like nothing exists. If I do grunt-s help, you'll see that none of the tasks that were built in are there now. They all get installed separately, and I'll show you guys that. But like the init task, that's a separate thing, and this just generates scaffolding for you. And when I talk about Yeoman in a little bit, I'll explain kind of what they're doing and what we're going to split. But the templates that are built in are the ones that I was like, I do these things all the time. I create common JS modules, Node modules. I mean, Grunt is a Node module. I create like Grunt plugins, or if you're a Grunt plugin author, you would use that template. We're going to build a system that allows you to say like, you know, specify like a GitHub repo for your template, or like have them in arbitrary folders and stuff like that, so you don't have to, they don't have to be built in. But that's coming. So if I grunt init Jquery, it's actually going to give me a bunch of boilerplate. I talked to the Jquery guys about their plugin repository that's upcoming, and we actually sat down and worked together on the manifest file and stuff for that. We actually went back and forth for a bit. I'm actually pretty involved with the Jquery project, so we talked about that. So I've got some kind of rough guidelines here built into the template, and it's just going to ask me a bunch of questions that's based on my environment. Like if the directory name is sample plugin, then it's going to default to sample plugin for the name, and when you enter it, it's going to default to like capitalizing it, that kind of thing. And this is all built into the init task, so it's got a lot of defaults. I'm using the prompt library. I don't know if Charlie wrote that. Someone wrote that around here, which is kind of a useful thing for getting useful information. It'll figure out the Git repo. If it is actually a Git repo, it'll just pull it out of there using Git in the subshell. Otherwise, it'll try to figure out from the environment. I'm going to use like all the defaults, and when it's all done, it's just going to generate this file structure. So this is just the init template, and this is just kind of just to show you, right? So I called it sample plugin, so it generates a manifest file that's going to be used by the Jquery site. It generates test files and source files. And if I run grunt at this point, well, it's not going to work yet, because I haven't installed any plugins. So this is the way that 04 is coming out. You'll actually have to do an npm install. Basically, when you have a Grunt project already made, you do two things. You clone it, and then you do an npm install, and then you run Grunt. So I'll do an npm install, and it's actually going to install a local version of Grunt and those 4 plugins that I required. Fortunately, the Wi-Fi gods are smiling upon us today. So this is where, oh, did I jinx myself? So when this installs, it'll actually have everything set up in the local node modules folder. And this is based on the package.js file that exists there. It describes in its dev dependencies. These are the Grunt plugins. See, I had to jinx myself. It's just going to sit there forever now. These are the Grunt plugins that are actually installed and required for this project in Grunt. You run an npm install, it'll download everything from npm as fast as it, I totally jinxed myself, as fast as it can. Everyone stop Dropbox right now, so this can finish. And they'll be available there. So then when you type Grunt, assuming you have it also installed globally, right, you only have to do that once. Type Grunt, and it will look at the local Grunt file, all of the plugins that are installed locally, the local version of Grunt, and it will just run all the tasks as defined in the folder. I'm just going to run this in the background and open up the folder just so you can see the kind of structure. The package.json file, now this is automatically generated by the Jquery init template, but you could do like an npm init to create a package.json file or use another tool or just write a JSON file. I don't like hand editing JSON, and for this particular template, it's just going to hard code these. Now these are actual npm modules. Grunt, there's a 0.40a. If you were to just do an npm install Grunt, it's going to be the latest version of 0.3 because this is not like done yet, but it's actually published to npm if you wanted to use 0.40a. And then these plugins are all at 0.10, and those are the ones that are compatible with 0.4. And so you would just add them into your package.json as dev dependencies, and then when you npm install inside of your project, it just pulls them all down. So it may have timed out, so let me try npm install again. Did it work? Well, let's see. So it died, let's see. So these are the dev dependencies listed there. Notice I've got the npm test. If you run npm test or have like use Travis CI that uses npm test for its default testing, it's just going to run Grunt and Qunit. So if Travis knows to like install all these dev dependencies, then that will just work. Or you might have to do like /node module /bin Grunt, that kind of thing. Let's see, let's go. So the Grunt file itself is JavaScript. It's not JSON, although a lot of the configuration looks like JSON, and this is a lot of template-y kind of stuff. But the whole idea is you export a function that receives Grunt as its first argument, and inside of the function you just do stuff with Grunt. And you would like init the config, initialize it by passing an object with data. It's pretty much declarative. You could write a custom task that doesn't use this. Like, you can define tasks, this is a function, just run a function. Okay, so you could use it as like a jfile, drop it, replace it pretty much. And so if you like register the task foo, like I'll just show you, right? Grunt.register task, like my foo, my awesome task, give it a function. That like could accept an argument. Grunt.log, arg, okay. See, has to solve the taxes. Let me go. Let's see, I had to change myself. Try one last time. Come on, you can do it. I'm as excited as you guys are. I won't background it. Well, let me just talk a little bit about the config, right? Like, it's just an object with properties. If you have a task named foo, it's probably going to use a property called foo in this config object if it has any configuration stuff. Depending on the task, it might have different needs and configuration, but most of the tasks look something like this. There's a concat task. You can specify options as an object key, object property under that configuration, and then you specify any number of targets dist is an arbitrary name that has some source and destination files, and like a lot of tasks are like this, right? Dist, again, totally arbitrary name. That would allow you to do like uglify :dist at the command line to just build that. But if I had like multiple things, like dist and foo, I could run uglify :foo, uglify :dist, or just uglify by itself, and it would do dist then foo. So like you can, that's a thing called a multitask. It's an abstraction we have in Grunt for doing lots of things with lots of different files with slightly different options. So that comes standard with most tasks. But again, if I register a task that just does something like this, it has no concept of the config. It doesn't care. I'm not using it inside of it. So if I run grunt my foo123, you're going to see it logs 123 OK in the most not beautiful way possible, and it succeeds. But if I was to like instead of doing that, return false. It would fail the task. You can return false, you can throw an exception, you can actually make the task, there's a synchronous task by default. You can make a task async by saying like var done equals this.async. On the this object there's a bunch of stuff, and one of them is an async function that sets a flag that says this task is asynchronous and returns the continuation function. And you can, if you were to do something asynchronously and say done and pass it in false or an error object, like it would fail the task that. So you can fail tasks asynchronously. By default, the system provides a synchronous interface to you so that you don't have to worry about all the async stuff, because I find for a lot of developers it's just extra stuff that they have to worry about. But you can make it fully supports asynchronous stuff. The task system is all asynchronous under the hood. But anyways, so if I were to look here, the concat task, its options, it's got this banner option. What that does is it takes whatever string you pass it and it puts that at the top of whatever you concatenate together. That's the banner for those files. All generated together. And so here, you see that I'm using actually Lodash, or underscore if you're familiar with that. I'm using Lodash templates in here, which will just interpolate this at the time you pull values out of the config, and it'll grab it, all the things are relative to the init object, the config object. And so you can just use a template string in there, and it'll pull data out of all these pkg.title, pkg.name. It's importing the data from the metadata from the Jquery plugin, which you see contains all of the information. So that banner is like being completely dynamically generated on the fly. And if I run grunt, oops, arg is defined whenever you use. So I'm using, it's linting everything by default. So I can fix that, or I can just comment it out. Yay. So now I run grunt. It's in this particular one, it's going to lint the grunt file, lint my source and test files with JS hint. It's going to actually run the unit tests headless in Phantom.js, which is a area who was talking about Esprima, and that stuff he wrote Phantom.js. It's a really cool utility. It's a headless WebKit. So you'd install that alongside Grunt. And now QUnit can actually run headless in the browser. It's once all the unit tests pass, you know, it's going to concatenate the files and build the output, and you'll see that in the dist folder, it's generated like the plugin file with a banner. So my source file has a big kind of like generic source banner, but for distribution I put in a version number and the date and stuff like that. And then the minified version is compressed with notify, right? So let's just say I want to get a little custom with this and say, oh, instead of like the file that I'm generating when I concat, I want the destination file to have like the version, right? So I could do like package name dash package version. And then for the source, this one's actually, when you uglify, it's using, I'm not hard coding the source in there, I'm actually grabbing the value from this value. So I don't have to rewrite multiple source destinations. But I want to put the version in there. So I'll grab this guy. And now when I run grunt, you'll see that the file it generates is, it has the version number inside of it. Which is nice, because if I want to go change the version number in like the manifest file, 01 point, a whole bunch of names, I can run grunt now and it'll just pull the data dynamically from that file and generate. So and there's like a clean plugin, you install the plugin, now you have a clean task that you can like clear out the distribution folder. I mean, it's just like an rm-rf basically. It just clears out that folder, and so you can regenerate stuff in there. So it's like, think of like a lot of the stuff that you want to do all the time in your projects. This just automates them. And really what grunt tasks are, these grunt plugins, are like a grunt wrapper written around a lib. Like, there's an uglify lib. right? You can install it, npm install -g, it's in your path. You can install it locally and use it as a lib in your projects. The Grunt task, the Grunt plugin is just like a wrapper around that works with Grunt, so you can use it as a task and configure it in like a standard way. That's mostly what these like little Grunt plugins are. Sometimes a plugin might contain all of the code and there's no lib. It's not the way I would recommend doing it, because then you can't use that programmatically somewhere else. But that's it. So think of like, it's like this task system for doing a lot of these things that you want to do over and over in your project. And really all you need to do is create the package JSON so that you can do npm install and get all your stuff, and anyone else who wants to contribute can do npm install and get all the stuff that's needed for that project. And it might be more than just Grunt plugins. It could be other stuff. It could be like, you know, like you want to include another lib like a connector express or rimraf or mid or p or whatever that you need. So you just put all your dev dependencies in there for your website. You're not going to publish your website to npm, but you'll use the package JSON file to tell npm what dependencies your project needs, and you'll run it. And then the other part, in addition to package JSON, is your Grunt file, which tells Grunt what to do. Like, if I scroll to the bottom here, you'll see after I load my tasks, grunt.load npm tasks, these are the plugins. I load them here, and then they're available in Grunt. Like if I do grunt --help, you'll actually see that they're in the list available tasks. These were this JS QUnit cat notify are in there because I installed the plugins. This one, default, is an alias for those tasks because I registered a task called default that says when you run grunt default or grunt with no other arguments, default is a special one, it just runs those. But you can have any number of alias tasks like this that just runs any number of things. Inside of a task, you can create a function, and in that you can tell it grunt.task.run if you want to programmatically determine the task to run. There's a whole API around running tasks and stuff like that. So I just want to show you, like, just to give you an idea of what this can actually do. I was pretty psyched about this. Let's see if this works. I checked out the latest version of Jquery, just like their head from master from GitHub. We'll see if this works quickly. If it doesn't work in like 20 seconds, I'll switch over to one that I've previously done this. Jquery builds its stuff using Grunt, and if you look at their Grunt file, it's like mega. They've got so much stuff in it. They've got a plugin that just for updating submodules. So instead of running git update submodules, you run Grunt, and it'll do that for you. So they've got a lot of little plugins, some that they've written and whatever. They use it to actually build all of Jquery. But what I was really interested in is that you can actually run their QUnit unit tests inside of the Phantom.js. And there's over 6,000 unit tests in the Jquery unit test suite. And what's really interesting is that they pretty much just work in Grunt with Phantom.js, which speaks to like the awesomeness of Phantom.js. Now, of course, running Grunt QUnit is no substitute for testing cross-browser because, come on, like every browser is going to behave differently. But if you have like a small set of unit tests and you just want to automate or do like some continuous integration kind of stuff, having the ability for Grunt to run these things headless is pretty awesome. If it fails, it'll exit with a non-zero exit code. We've got a list of what the exit code means and stuff like that, so you can actually like rely on it to understand what's going on. Updates to the modules is taking a few minutes. So I'm just going to go to the previous directory I had. So if I look in here, I had to do one thing in order to make this work. Let's see, two things. So they're using the old version of Grunt, where the Grunt file was called grunt.js. It's gruntfile.js now. And it could be gruntfile.coffee if you use CoffeeScript. I'm not into that thing, but hey, knock yourself out. So I'm going to modify their QUnit to run from a localhost. Okay, and so if I do that, and I have to comment out the Ajax stuff because they actually have a custom server. Damn, am I like out of time? Is it like over? Because that sounded like shit was going down. Ajax, I'll just remove Ajax so you can see this. And if I like run grunt server QUnit verbose, where's my browser? This guy over here. So it's actually like, Grunt is temporarily running a web server and running unit tests against them on the left-hand side in Phantom. Oh, it timed out. Server unit, let me just double check, see if I can screw that up. I guess I screwed it up. Well, I don't know what's, oh, there it is. And you'll see like, it's running like the unit tests in Grunt over here. There's like 6,000 of them. At the same time, because there's a local web server, it's actually running them all like in Jquery, in Chrome as well, so you can kind of see them wasted out. But while this is going, I want to talk a little bit, 5 minutes, just give you guys an idea of what the deal is like with Grunt coming up in the future and Yeoman, because this will take a couple minutes. So, who's heard of Yeoman? Okay, a lot of people have heard of Yeoman. So Yeoman started out as like, they have some really cool ideas. They're going to basically help people understand like what they should be doing. Think about like HTML5 boilerplate, but like just more generic across multiple different types of projects, right? And a system that will kind of build that for you. And so what they did is they wanted to do this, backbone boilerplate wanted this, so I allowed Grunt to be wrapped by other things where you'd say, hey, this thing includes Grunt, all the functionality of Grunt, and a whole bunch of built-in tasks. But I've started moving completely away from that, and Grunt doesn't include any built-in tasks. You have to install them locally in your project, which allows you to have multiple different projects using multiple different versions of Grunt and plugins, so that they're not installed globally, right? That just doesn't work if you have, talk to me offline if you want to know all about why that doesn't work. So, so 1 of 6,000 unit tests failed. That's pretty awesome, and that one is actually a minor bug in like Qt that Phantom.js uses. So, if the unit tests in Qunit, like for Jquery can run, you know, your projects are probably going to be okay to run in Qunit for testing your stuff. But anyways, Yeoman has like they have some really cool ideas about helping people do things, but they were doing it in a way that or they had been doing it in a way that causes a lot of people to say, hey, I have to choose between Grunt and Yeoman, because you use Yeoman and then you want to diverge from that. You would just have to switch to Grunt. You couldn't use Yeoman anymore. So we actually had a great meeting last week, and they're pretty much going to be not wrapping Grunt anymore, is my understanding. Grunt will be the tool that you use when you build a Yeoman project. But when you build a Yeoman project, you'll use Yeoman. It'll generate all the scaffolding for you, all that stuff. The Grunt init thing is probably going to go away, and I'm probably just going to use their tools or something like that. And Grunt's not going to have them built anymore. Grunt's going to be the task runner, the plugins, all that stuff. So we're going to actually kind of separate them a little bit so it's more clear what's going on between the two. We've got a lot of good feedback about that so far, and we're still trying to figure out what that means. There's a couple open issues, both in the Grunt and the Yeoman tracker, which is really, really cool. So that's what the future looks like for Yeoman and Grunt. They're going to be related. I'm going to say, like, Grunt's going to say, hey, use Yeoman to do building your structures of your projects, and Yeoman's going to say, hey, use Grunt for doing all those tasks inside of your projects, but you're not going to like choose. You can use both of them side by side. Grunt 04 is coming out really soon, writing docs for it. Again, if anyone wants to help with docs, by all means, please talk to me, because I've got a lot to write. I'm like writing a getting started guide that basically talks about what I talked about, like package JSON, Grunt file, how to configure it, how to get started. You know, so we've got a lot of cool stuff in the works, and it's really close to getting released. So that's an overview of Grunt. If you want to talk more specifics during the day, I'll be around. You can talk about custom tasks, talk about async versus synchronous, talk about plugins, whatever. Like, I'm around. I hope that's been helpful information for you guys, like people who weren't familiar with Grunt, how you can actually use it in your projects. I know people who are already familiar, you might not have learned much new. I mean, the one thing that trips up a lot of people is that async thing. If you want, if your task is always quitting before your code actually runs, because it's an async code, you have to tell Grunt to wait for it to complete, because it doesn't do that by default. And so inside of your task, you would do something like, let's see, go back to my previous example, here in my foo task. If I do like, set timeout, grunt.log.writeLine. And if I run like, you'll see that it just exits without errors. It doesn't wait for that to complete because it's asynchronous. Grunt just says, hey, when all the tasks are done, quit. And so Grunt right now is a little brute force if you're trying to use it as a lib or something like that. It's just going to quit everything. On the list is to make it more like a lib so it plays nicely with your stuff. Or to be like, hey, Grunt's all done now instead of process.exiting for you. So that's not for 04, but that's 05 that we're working on rewriting. You would do like something like this, var done equals this.async, and then when you're all done, you would call done. This is just like, this trips a lot of people up, so I'm mentioning it to you guys so you do learn something new today. Now if you run grunt my foo, it'll run it, it'll wait for a second, and then it'll say done and exit. So this is like, by default though, tasks are all synchronous, unless you make them async. I just want to throw that out there, a little nugget. But anyways, that's my time. I'm all done. So thank you.